in many future battles on Capitol Hill. Few people in Congress have been fighting this fight as long or as successfully as Chairman Jeb Hensarling. It's been a privilege working with him on A1P, and it's my privilege to hand the podium over to him. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you for the honor of working with you yet again. Some of you know that Mike and I just finished a huge battle against corporate welfare. It could have gone a little better, but it's time for another battle, and perhaps even a more important one in the short time that Senator Mike Lee has been in Washington. What a great fighter, what a great champion, what a crusader for liberty and the Constitution he has proven to be. And I'm glad to renew our partnership yet again on this incredible, important project. I'm also honored to be on this turf, Hillsdale, also indispensable to the cause of liberty, all the great things that they have done. Thank you for hosting, Matt, this event. And yes, it is intimidating to speak in the shadow of this painting. It is a reminder, though, that just this last summer, my wife and I took our 12-year-old son and 13-year-old daughter to Independence Hall in Philadelphia. It is important for my wife and I that our children learn about the cause of liberty, learn about American exceptionalism. And as often as I've been to Independence Hall, it is still stirring to walk in the footsteps of the patriots. But when you're there, you're reminded of the stories of what America was at that point in our history. There was crushing debt. There was rampant inflation in our young nation. There were bitter trade disputes. Some in Massachusetts even threatened secession. In retrospect, maybe not such a bad idea, but I sense that moment has passed. Patrick Henry, you may recall, boycotted the proceedings. Madison and General Henry Knox had to travel to Mount Vernon to talk Washington into even attending the event. Edmund Randolph worried as the delegates gathered, quote, "Are we not on the eve of war, which is only prevented by the hopes from this Constitution?" Indeed, much despair and anguish ruled the day, and more than once the entire enterprise depicted in this wonderful painting seemed destined for failure. But it didn't fail. It didn't fail because the spirit of '76 was still alive and well and resounded echoingly in those hallowed halls. So the seeds of American exceptionalism that were surely planted in 1776 took firm root in 1787. It is then that we, the people, truly secured our liberty, and the course of human events would never be the same. In his penultimate statement of the Union message, President Reagan reminded us of these three simple words: we, the people, make all the difference between our Constitution and the constitutions of other nations. In those other constitutions, he said, quote, "The government tells the people what they are allowed to do. In our Constitution, we, the people, tell the government what it can do, and that it can only do those things that are listed in that document and no others." So the sheer genius of our Constitution, its framework of checks and balances, limited enumerated powers, co-equal branches of government, secured our fundamental rights and gave rise to the freest, most prosperous civilization the world has ever known. But to put it mildly, over the years, many of these principles have been neglected and others outright abandoned. Instead of a limited government operating from a clearly defined enumeration of powers, we have a Leviathan that has metastasized into the nation's largest creditor, debtor, employer, property owner, tenant, insurer, healthcare provider, pension underwriter, and I would go on, but I have run out of breath. Instead of checks and balances, we have the president's pen and phone. Instead of three co-equal branches of government, we have seen the ominous rise of the unaccountable fourth branch of government, namely agency government. It is a reminder that although we have ominous foreign threats to our safety and security that lead the nightly news, threats that emanate from faraway capitals like Moscow, Damascus, and Tehran, we cannot and must not lose sight of the domestic threats to our freedom and liberties that emanate from another capital city far closer to home, namely Washington, D.C. Some of these domestic threats may appear less evident in the short term, but over time they are as corrosive to our Constitution and to our national well-being as individuals and as a nation. None of us can ever afford to lose sight of Madison's famous warning that, quote, there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment by those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. That's why we're gathered here today to launch the Article 1 project, a new network of conservatives working together to reclaim Congress's rightful constitutional role. I'm privileged to co-chair this effort. I'm honored to serve with my colleagues in this effort. As members of Congress, we have no more important jobs to take more seriously than upholding the Constitution. Yet I do not recall ever in my lifetime when I have seen the Constitution under as much assault as it is today. Just in the last few years, we've seen an American president unilaterally create new law, annul existing law, and even declare the Senate in recess when it was not so, just so he could install political functionaries into top government positions. Clearly, that whole advice and consent foolishness can be such a bother to a president. This from a man who frequently reminds us that he used to be a constitutional law professor. I have no doubt that his former students have a valid cause of action for teaching malpractice, and I trust the statute of limitations has not run. The adherents of this governing philosophy, so at odds with America's founding principles, call themselves progressive. As my good friend, Speaker Paul Ryan, has said, the ironic thing about progressivism is that it's so terribly old-fashioned. For progressives believe only a certain class of people, a class to which they, of course, belong, has the duty and the responsibility to hold political power. And we, the rest of us, we the people, must yield to their expert management for our own good, because as one architect of Obamacare said, the rest of us are just too stupid to know better. How could we possibly know what health insurance plan is best for us, what kind of mortgage we need, or even how much water we should use to flush our toilets? To progressives, the Constitution is a huge inconvenience. Herbert Crowley, a leading voice of the early progressive movement and co-founder of the New Republic magazine, said as much when he stated that the progressive vision of government, quote, legislates but without being a legislature. It administers but without being an executive. It adjudicates but without any power of attaching final construction to the law. It is simply a convenient means of consolidating the divided activities of the government for certain practical social purposes. Madison, in Federalist number 47, had a different take on the notion when he wrote, quote, the combination of all power, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. The seed of this form of tyranny was planted during the Wilson administration, bloomed during FDR's New Deal, became overgrown in LBJ's Great Society, has now reached crisis proportions under President Obama. This century-long progressive expansion of unconstitutional government has unleashed the modern regulatory state as we know it today. Extremely powerful, exceedingly intrusive, imperiously opaque, bafflingly bureaucratic, and alarmingly unaccountable. Now, Congress has been no innocent bystander during all of this. Part of the reason that we have this out-of-control regulatory state is because for far too long, Congress has outsourced its constitutional responsibilities. As we all know, Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution states, quote, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. Thus, when Congress delegates its fundamental legislative authority to an unaccountable, unelected bureaucracy, it has arguably acted in an unconstitutional manner. This self-enfeeblement must end. Because when Congress allows its authority to be usurped, the people's right to both self-government and due process is undermined. Instead of being governed by the rule of law, citizens become more and more governed by the rule of rulers and the discretion of regulators. The citizens' right to carefully deliberate proposed legislation through their representatives in Congress becomes reduced to nothing more but a notice and comment period when they are permitted to merely lodge complaints and suggestions, all of which the unelected bureaucrats are free to ignore, all of which the unelected bureaucrats may use to retaliate. The result? It is OSHA now, not Congress, that governs over workplace safety. It is the EPA now, not Congress, that governs our air quality. It is HHS now, not Congress, that governs over our health care. And most alarmingly, to our economic opportunity and economic liberty, it is the bureaucratic progeny of Dodd-Frank that now rules over our financial markets. So where do we go from here? First, Congress. Congress must reaffirm the primacy of congressional authority. And of all the tools that we can use to address this, none is greater than the power of the purse. This Article 1 responsibility is the most potent and effective instrument we have to hold the executive accountable. To paraphrase a rather colorful Texan, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, if you grab a bureaucracy by its budget, its hearts and minds will soon follow. For years, Congress has slowly surrendered its constitutional power over federal spending, and our first priority must be to reclaim it. To do so, Congress needs to seriously reform the budget process and come up with an entirely new one. Earlier in my career, National Review once called me representative budget reform, so I am eager to start this work in earnest yet again. In addition to budget reform, Congress must also end the practice of delegating this lawmaking authority to the unaccountable, unelected agency government. No more passing vague laws to direct agencies to fill in the blanks. So, for example, the REINS Act, which has already passed the House, would introduce both constitutional accountability into the system by requiring that Congress approve any major new legislations. The act is simple, the act is profound, and its passage must be part of this incredibly important effort. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us each today take our stand for freedom as in olden times when the brave patriots stood for freedom at Independence Hall. That remarkable group who dared to believe they could start the world all over again. So let us each today, as part of this Article 1 process, let us dare to believe that we can again secure the blessings of liberty for coming generations in America. Let us rededicate ourselves to Article 1 of the Constitution.